Welcome back to AppStories. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. We've got a great episode today to talk all about iPadOS 16, but in particular, Stage Manager. And this episode is brought to you by RevenueCat, Collide, and Pillow, our fine sponsors. So we need to dig in, Federico, because you have published a story today. I have published my macOS review, which we'll talk about another time.
Yes.
Today is the day we're going to talk about Stage Manager on the iPad, because it's been a very long and tortured saga over these last 5 months. And you have chronicled that in your story. I think you made the right call of not kind of doing the blow-by-blow about what the summer was like. We talked about it.
Nobody cares about that.
No. I mean, that's not what people who aren't on betas care about, because they just know what they're downloading today. But so we're here to talk about what you're downloading onto your iPad today, if you're updating. If you want to hear a little bit about some of the background and process and stuff, you can listen to the AppStories Plus segment, which is part of our AppStories Plus subscription, where we do longer episodes that we deliver early. So why don't we dive in, Federico? I think...
But let me ask you. So you read my story.
Yeah.
How would you describe it? Like, what's your takeaway? Because it's a long one. It's 10,000 words just about arguably a feature. But you were one of the first people to read it in advance last week. What do you think of it? How do you think we should approach this?
What I think, very big picture, is that Apple is still figuring out what Stage Manager is, which is why it hasn't been fixed. We're going to talk about this. There are a number of technical issues and odd design choices. There's all sorts of different problems here. But I think the reason that they didn't get resolved was, first of all, the technical issues were so severe that I don't think they really ever got to thinking fundamentally about the design issues at all. But beyond that, I think that they didn't get resolved because I think Apple has lost track a little bit about what they think Stage Manager is meant to do. Or maybe it's just at fundamental odds with what a lot of the iPad community thinks it should be or wants it to be. Because this was to be a big moment for the iPad, right? It's coming out as a multi-window environment in a way that was closer to what you have available on the Mac, where you have multiple overlapping windows as opposed to split screens and that sort of thing, which we've had in the past. And it's disappointing. There's no other way to slice it, really, especially on the iPad. I've got things to say about it on the Mac next week, but yeah, it's been kind of disappointing. I think we should, though, maybe talk first about really what is it and what does it do, and then get into some of those, kind of follow what your story does, and then get into some of the technical and design things.
Yeah, right. So I think you're right. We should first describe what Stage Manager is, and I think we should do that in terms of what it is for users and what it is for developers. And I'm going to be talking about developers later. So for users, Stage Manager is an optional setting, right? So it's disabled by default. And I can tell you, if you are setting up a new iPad or if you are upgrading to iPadOS 16, you will not see anything about Stage Manager in the onboarding flow of iPadOS.
Yep.
There are no setup pages. There are no splash screens. There's nothing about it. It's disabled by default. But what Apple does is they put a toggle for Stage Manager in Control Center. And Control Center is one of the two ways to enable Stage Manager on your iPad. The other one is in Settings. Stage Manager is a mode of iPadOS. It works on the iPad Pro 5th gen and later. So that now it works on older devices as well. So I believe it works on the iPad Pro 2018 and later and the M1 iPad Air.
Right.
When I say it's a mode, what I mean is that if you enable Stage Manager, it takes over the existing iPad multitasking UI. So if you enable Stage Manager, you can no longer use the traditional split view, slide over, the shelf for multiple windows. It's a a completely different UI for split view, slide over, and all those other things that replaces it. But if you don't want to use it anymore, at any point you can press a button and you can go back to the regular iPad multitasking. So you can switch back and forth between them. The main idea behind Stage Manager, it's called Stage Manager, which I guess the name itself is sort of a pun on theatrical productions. I believe the stage manager is the person in charge of managing a theatrical production, and the actors and the set and everything that goes well on stage. And in the context of iPadOS, Stage Manager is a windowing system. It lets you use, for the first time, more than 2 apps at the same time on your iPad. You can use up to 4 windows. And pay attention, I'm not saying 4 apps. I'm saying 4 windows. There's a distinction, which we'll get to later. You can use up to 4 windows at the same time on your iPad, and those are floating windows. They're similar to macOS. These are floating windows that overlap that you can resize. And so you can resize, you can move them around, and you can click on a window in the background, and you can see it just like on a Mac. It's a windowing system. You can see more stuff on screen at the same time. There are some unique twists about Stage Manager. For starters, it's very much based on the concept of creating multiple stages for you. A stage is like a workspace, and the workspace is where you put your windows. So you can have these multiple stages that can be basically multiple groups of apps. You can have a stage that's a Safari window and a Notes window. And you can have another stage that's a mail, reminders, and Twitter, and so forth. You can create an unlimited number of these stages. And that's the first thing. Stage Manager wants to organize how you work on your iPad with these workspaces called stages. The other unique twist about it is in how you place and move your windows around. Stage Manager was designed to sort of alleviate some of the pressure, remove some of the friction that is typically found in traditional windowing systems. Meaning, given the iPad's limited screen real estate, Stage Manager will try to arrange windows for you. It'll try to help you by making sure that every window is always as visible as it can possibly be. Mm-hmm. Meaning, it kind of moves windows around for you, right?
Yeah, it's like grid. It's a grid system, kind of, right? It's like
kind of.
I think you described it as Windows on rails, and rails being that concept in video games where you can't go everywhere you want to go in the game. It kind of guides you along a particular path, and that's kind of what it's doing.
But it's an invisible path. It's an invisible path. It's not like you see lines on screen telling you where the quote-unquote drop points are. It's just done behind the scenes. What this means, and also this goes in combination with the fact that unlike macOS or Windows or Linux or whatever, you cannot really freely resize windows. You can grab a window from the corner or from the edge, and you can resize it. You can make it bigger, make it smaller. But in doing that, you can only choose from a set of predetermined sizes. This is due to how iPad apps are developed using a technology called size classes that basically ensures an iPad app supports multiple form factors, whether it's running in full screen or in split view, which sizes of split view, or in slide over, or whether it's in portrait, on landscape, whether it's running on the iPhone because it's a universal app, whether it's also running on the Mac because it's a Catalyst app. And Stage Manager takes all of these existing size classes and uses them as these predetermined sizes in Stage Manager. Meaning, in practice, when you go in with your finger or with the pointer and resize a window in Stage Manager, you're not resizing it pixel by pixel like on a Mac. When you're dragging the window, it kind of goes like a slider. It'll go pop and it'll get a size, and then tap again and it'll be another size.
Right.
There's like an invisible slider, basically, that controls these multiple sizes that you have, but it's not real Mac-like resizing.
And it still animates a little strangely to me. Like you get these weird distortions of like text or images being stretched one direction or the other.
Yes, but that's the idea. It's a windowing system that lets you use more apps at the same time instead of going with the tiling system like Split View or like Windows 11. Apple went with a Mac-like overlapping system of windows.
Or home screen widgets for that matter. I mean, home screen widgets are a grid system, a tiling system in a way.
Kinda, yeah. Actually, you're right. They went with an overlapping system, but it's not like macOS, meaning it doesn't give you total freedom, and it kind of uses that, disguises that lack of freedom as it actually wants to help you remove some of the pressure of managing windows, of resizing windows, and switching between workspaces. Mm-hmm. And that's the idea. Now, this is how it works for users. But I also want to mention how it works for developers, because I think this is one of the key underlying design problems of Stage Manager, that it's not a thing that Apple can fix in, say, 16.2 or 16.3. It will require a fundamental rethinking of how all of this works. And how Stage Manager works for developers is there's nothing for developers. Stage Manager is like, and windowing specifically, it's like something that happens to apps. Nothing is required from developers to adopt Stage Manager because there's no developer technology to optimize for Stage Manager. Stage Manager doesn't have an API, doesn't have a framework for developers. If you're a developer, there's nothing you can do to optimize for Stage Manager. In fact, your app doesn't know it's running in Stage Manager. It's just a mode that overrides whatever behavior you may have set for your app running on iPadOS, and your app has no knowledge of the fact that it's now running in window mode instead of full screen or split view.
Do you think that the assumption there is that if an app supports size classes, that, I don't know, perhaps it's assumed that it should work with this? I mean, I guess that's the idea, right?
That's exactly the point. That was what you just said. That's exactly the single thing upon which Apple decided to bet this entire feature. Mm-hmm. Their thinking was, if iPad apps already support size classes and multiple orientations, how about we use those multiple sizes to sort of have windowing within using that technology without requiring anything else from developers? What if we make it, quote unquote, just work? And suddenly you flip a switch and you go from full screen and split view to Stage Manager and overlapping windows. That point, that's something that our listeners should keep in mind, because that is one of the key problems of Stage Manager. Developers haven't been able to optimize for it because there's nothing to optimize for. And that's a key technical decision that was made possibly last year from Apple. And it's very much unlike how Windows work on macOS.
Right.
We're going to talk about this in a few minutes. But yeah, that's exactly why, you probably have seen developers say, I did nothing for Stage Manager, because there's literally nothing they have or can do.
Well, one of the things that's really odd to me, and that I think it speaks to this issue a little bit, is that here we are on the iPad, the environment where your pointer can be anything from the high precision pencil to the very imprecise finger, and yet you've got zero window chrome. Like, if you're using your finger, it's very hard to move these to expand these windows, compared to, I mean, and I contrast it to the Mac, where we do have a very precise pointer with a trackpad or a mouse, but we do have window Chrome because you've got places to pick up the window and to corner. You can resize it from any corner, and you can drag it from the title bar or the toolbar or whatever. And yeah, it's that's to me is an odd decision, but I think it probably is in part a result of doing it the way they did based on size classes, because it would probably be pretty complicated to drop these apps into some kind of Chrome that the developer had no control over.
Right. And going with that approach, like I said, it would require a massive rethinking of how Windows work on iPad, right?
Right.
It will require bringing some of the technologies that you have on macOS. And I'm sorry if I'm getting too technical about this, but I'm going to try and put it in very simple terms so that our audience can understand and appreciate the nuance of this problem. Because I think it's actually like...
It's very fundamental to the problems that the whole article...
Yes. On macOS, for example, if you have an app and it's running in a window and your app wants to display a pop-up, like, I don't know, like think of the calendar app and you click on an event and you open the event in a popover, right?
Right.
On macOS, one of the key windowing technologies that developers can have is that pop-up can sort of be displayed outside of the bounds of the window. So if you have a monthly calendar and you click on an event that is on the right side of the calendar, like say it's a Saturday event, right? Mm-hmm. That pop-up will likely be displayed outside of the right edge of the window. So Windows can spawn these pop-up elements outside of their own bounds. That is, it may sound obvious, but you've probably seen this thousands of times on your computer, and it makes sense. That's not possible on iPadOS with Stage Manager, because that's Windows, right? On iPad have never worked that way.
Right? They're not really windows, they're apps. They have to be contained. Exactly. They have to be contained within the app itself.
Exactly. And that is the key thing that I mentioned a few minutes ago. We're calling them Windows now because they look like Windows, but they're not really Windows, right, in the sense that you are accustomed to thinking about Windows. And this limitation is just one of them, right? Developers have no control. Like I said, because they don't know, because they have no way of knowing what if their app is running in Stage Manager, there's nothing they can do to optimize for it. They can't know if the window, like for example, an obvious thing would be if my window is too small, maybe don't let me display this huge menu, right? That's not a thing they can do. They have no, there's a bunch of these things. And obviously, as you mentioned, there's no UI Chrome around Windows. And that brings me to, as I explained in the article, I try to follow this approach of what is it like to work with Stage Manager and what are my problems with it? And that brings me to one of the very key problems that I have with Stage Manager. And that is the very basic action of grabbing windows. You hinted at this just a minute ago, saying that it's kind of difficult with your finger to grab windows and resize them. But I'm actually struggling with even with the pointer. Mm-hmm. I think it's way too difficult to grab a window. And the reason is, unlike macOS, there's, like you said, there's no UI Chrome. There's no Apple in the human interface guidelines, which I actually went in and read to prepare for this review. They don't call it UI Chrome. They call it the frame of a window, which is a cool term, sort of like imagine you have a painting and you have a frame around it. The frame of the window on your Mac, for example, click on the Finder icon right now, and you will see the title bar with the traffic light controls and the name of the window and a bunch of toolbar buttons, right? Developers can customize that. And it's quite large, so that when you go in with a cursor with your mouse, it's very easy to grab. You don't have to be too precise about it. Title bars are usually quite chunky, and you can go there, place your cursor, and just move it around, and you grab the window, and it works. On iPad, with Stage Manager, the grabbable area of the quote-unquote title bar is a very narrow horizontal strip of pixels that is basically the top edge of the window. It's not visually delimited by anything. Because again, keep in mind, iPad apps are usually designed and written to be running in full screen. You don't have the developer API technology or just design guideline to have a chunky title bar in your iPad app. And so you end up in Stage Manager with this invisible area that's very narrow. That's where you need to place the pointer to grab a window. And I'm really struggling with it. And I cannot tell you how many times I thought I was grabbing a window, but I really wasn't. You have an alternative. You may say, well, Tichy, you could actually just click and hold on the multitasking menu, the 3 dots.
Right.
That also serves as a drag indicator. Sure, you could do that. You could say, well, my reference point is the multitasking menu. I'm going to drag that. But you can try. But more often than not, you'll likely be accidentally triggering the menu instead of dragging it.
Yeah, no, it's that's too hard. Let me ask you a quick question about this. What is the difference between dragging on one of the corners of a window that has the little indicator, the little curved indicator, versus a corner that doesn't have it? Because as far as I can tell, they do the same thing, right?
They do the same thing. The little pulling indicator is just a visual aid that the system uses inconsistently to tell you where the extra space is. So if you place Safari all the way to the right of the screen, the pulling indicator is going to be on the bottom left, almost to tell you, hey, look, this window can expand to the left of the screen because there's more space in this direction. That's why it moves around. That's what it means. It's not totally accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I get it, but it is kind of confusing because I'm looking right now. I've got carrot weather on one side that's about 3/4 of my iPad screen, and I've got messages on the left in a narrow strip, and the 2 little curved things are facing each other on the bottom, which I guess is because messages is skinny and there's space to the right, but there's not really space to the right because carrot weather's there. And the same goes for carrot weather, right? I mean, it's okay. I get it. I mean, it's good to have a hint for people to see that they can drag from the corner since there's no Chrome.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by RevenueCat. If you're a developer, your time should be spent focused on what makes your app unique and special, not messing around with StoreKit. In-app subscriptions are critical to a lot of app success, but getting the infrastructure right is tough. That is, unless you're using RevenueCat. RevenueCat is payments infrastructure simplified. You don't have to worry about managing servers or writing complex back-end code. They take care of all of that for you. What's more, RevenueCat is cross-platform, so when you decide to expand beyond iOS to Android or the web, you can still use RevenueCat. RevenueCat lets you sync status across all of your customers' devices, and it has terrific out-of-the-box analytics to track your revenue, customer retention, and churn, so you're always on top of how your business is doing. RevenueCat integrates in-app purchase data with best-in-class tools, too, and it's trusted by over 9,000 apps, including ones like Notion, StockTwits, and the photography app VSCO. Set up RevenueCat today. Integrating with your app will take just a few hours, not days. So what are you waiting for? Visit RevenueCat.com to learn more today. Again, that URL is RevenueCat.com. Subscription management built for mobile apps. Our thanks to RevenueCat for their support of the show.
So before we talk about other fundamental problems and bugs and things that I don't like about Stage Manager, I wanna be extremely honest here. At the moment, I'm not sure, and I talk about this in the story. I'm not sure if I will keep using Stage Manager on my iPad Pro on a regular basis right now. I mean, obviously, I'm gonna keep an eye on the evolution of the platform and this feature, and also I wanna make this extremely clear. And I also tried in the conclusion of the story. I still very strongly believe in the iPad and iPadOS as a platform, as a type of computer that needs to exist for people like me. And my belief for this concept of a computer, this applies to the Microsoft Surface. Like, I'm talking about convertible tablets in general. I just happen to like iPad and iPadOS more. But my belief in this type of device is really unwavering, I would say. I totally buy into the idea that it's great to have a thing that is both a tablet, that you place it on a keyboard, it's now a laptop, you put it on a desk, you run a cable to it, it's now a desktop workstation connected to a monitor. Like, that thing I want in my life. I want to use it. That's the thing I want. And there have been moments this summer, and again in the past 2 weeks, which is when Stage Manager stopped crashing for me in early October. There have been moments when, in the right conditions, which is an expression that I used multiple times in the story, in the right conditions, Stage Manager felt nice. Once I understood how to use it and how to avoid its problems, like when Apple was announcing the new iPads last week, and I was keeping an eye on Twitter, and I had a messages window on the side,
Right.
and I had a notes window on the other side, and I was also keeping an eye on Discord, and like, I took a look at my setup, and I thought, oh, this is pretty cool that I can do this on the iPad now. So I'm not saying that Stage Manager is useless. What I'm saying is, I think I like windowing on my iPad more than I like Stage Manager. I like the idea. I don't like the delivery system for it.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. I was going to ask you if there were maybe going forward, it's maybe certain types of work where you'd be more likely to use it, such as you described, where you're keeping an eye on Twitter and maybe taking some notes, or watching a video and chatting with your friends and messages, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think anything that requires more than two things at once, I think I want to use Stage Manager for it. And there's also an argument to be made for the fact that in iPadOS 16 you have to choose between these modes. Like, they are mutually exclusive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either you use Slide Over and Split View, or you use Stage Manager. But really, what I want is to have all of them at the same time. Like, there are, I guess, if I need to buy into this whole workspace idea, then I would make the case for some workspaces would benefit from Stage Manager, others from Split View, and I would still love to have my system-wide access to Slide Over utilities.
This episode of AppStories is brought to you by Collide. Traditional endpoint security tools can make your workplace feel like a surveillance state, turn users and IT teams into adversaries, and ultimately drive your employees to work on unsecured personal devices. It doesn't have to be that way. Collide is a device security solution built around honest security. Their philosophy is that employees aren't your biggest security risk, they're your biggest allies, and your relationship with them should be based on transparency and informed consent. Collide works by notifying your employees of security issues via Slack and giving them step-by-step instructions on how to resolve them themselves. For IT and security teams, Collide provides the right level of visibility for Mac, Windows, and Linux devices, and it can answer questions about your fleet's security that traditional MDMs can't. You can meet your security goals without compromising your values. Visit collide.com/appstories to find out how. If you follow that link, they'll hook you up with a goodie bag just for activating a free trial. That's KOLIDE.com/appstories. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show.
Now, there's also something else that I should mention that I also cover in the story. I am not a workspaces person when it comes to using apps on my computer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a simple guy. Usually I just have one app open in front of me or two. There are those instances where like multiple things are going on, and so I need to open a mess of windows. But for context, on the Mac, I don't use multiple desktops. I never did. I always keep everything on one desktop, and I open and close the apps I need at any given time. I've never been huge on using multiple displays.
Yeah.
I'm just I think it's one of my limitations. Maybe because I'm a guy, I can do one thing at a time.
Well, I think it's partly what you do too, what your work is. And I mean, because I'm very much like you. I don't usually use more than 2 or 3 apps at a given time, and I'm not really into spaces or multiple external displays either. But I do. What I appreciate about Stage Manager, and I think is a good idea, is that I don't like to have to open and close all those windows all the time. If I have a day where I'm going to work on, I may not ever be working in more than 1 or 2 apps, but if I work in 10 apps that day, I might as well have all 10 of them open at once and be able to switch between my workspaces or, sets or workspaces or whatever you call them in Stage Manager by clicking in the strip on the side. And unfortunately, I feel like it's too difficult to create and manage those spaces. I mean, I think there's a lot that can be done to make that situation better. But that's the kind of thing that I actually kind of like, because otherwise, if you do what I do, which is just have all those apps open at once, you just have lots of windows and they're all overlapping and it gets pretty messy. And I like the fact that Stage Manager organizes that a little bit.
Yeah, so we should talk about that. I think
we should talk about the strip and how stages are created, because I think the most fundamental problem here, and I don't want to take away your explain your article, Federico, but the fact.
No, please do, because I've been so overexposed to all of this for 5 months. I could use someone else talk to me about it.
Well, and I mean, I've been thinking about it a lot too, because I've been thinking it from the Mac perspective. I've also read your story, and we've talked about it a bunch. But to me, the problem starts with the fact that Stage Manager insists on creating a new stage for every single app that's opened. There's no such thing as an empty stage, and there's no way to open an app onto an existing stage unless it's an app that's already in your recent strip or in the dock that you shift click on. So there's just not many ways to build these stages without an awful lot of dragging and dropping. And I know that there are like 5 different ways you can do it on the iPad that you describe in your story. There are fewer ways actually on the Mac, which is frustrating in its own right. But I think that the system is constantly trying to create a new stage, creates both, it's disorienting, it's hyperactive, and it makes it hard to organize your work.
Yeah, so my main problem with how the strip works and how the stages work is that I'm thinking about this exactly backwards from the way Apple designed it.
I think you're right.
And I
think we both are.
And I think a lot of people are like us, but we'll see what happens, I guess. So what I mean is, I don't like being in the situation where every app I open or every link I click opens in a separate thing from what I'm doing at the moment, losing my context. That
Exactly.
is key to this for me. Stage Manager, the way it's designed, it constantly pulls you along with it, losing your focus and your context.
It feels to me like a weirdly related to full screen mode in that way, where it's not full screen mode. It's a level down from that, but it's also kind of forcing you into a particular way of using an app.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. I think Apple approached this from a perspective of, we want to keep the iPads one app at a time nature. So we are going to default to opening windows in separate workspaces, and later, if you want, you can switch back to your previous one and drag in the other app as, to unify those workspaces. Two problems with this. First, it's tedious to do that. As you will see, our listeners upgrading to iPadOS 16, try and work with it for a few days, and you will notice that Stage Manager, there's going to be a lot of this dance of switching back and forth between workspaces, and something opens in a separate workspace, so you have to switch back to the previous one and then drag in the window you wanted. There's a lot of this, like back and forth, in the current version of Stage Manager.
And eventually you might even give up and just use one app at a time. And then you think to yourself, why am I even in Stage Manager?
Exactly, which brings me to the second point. If that was where Apple started from, we need to keep the iPad's intuitive nature even in Stage Manager. If that's what happened, I think that's a fundamental design misdirection, because you cannot have it both ways. You cannot say we want to bring the power and flexibility of windowing to iPadOS, but at the same time, we also want to keep the iPad's intuitive one app at a time nature. I mean, you can have it both ways, and the result is this version of Stage Manager. Like, it's just a bad product, because you have these two very different, conflicting design philosophies, right? That they have an everlasting tension between them. Do you want to use one thing at a time? Do you want to have windows? And I think Apple tried to reconcile this, and honestly failed.
Well, if they reconciled it at all, they reconciled it in favor of a single window, which I think is the wrong direction, personally.
Yeah. So this is one of those underlying. Well, actually, unlike the fact that there's no Stage Manager API, and unlike how windows are created, that's a very deep technical thing that would probably require iPadOS 17. For this, I think Apple can actually iterate on in the iPadOS 16 cycle. And this is exactly what I would like to see Apple do after this story, after other articles that I know are coming out on other websites and all the podcasts. Take this criticism. Because, I mean, look, if we are criticizing this thing, it's not because we hate Apple. It's because we like Apple, and we love our iPads even more, and we want them to be better, and we want to use them more, and we want to have a nice feeling when using them, right?
We want to have more flexibility in how we use them. And the problem is that this is a feature that promises flexibility but doesn't deliver on it.
Yeah. So I think in the meantime, Apple should take this criticism, understand where it comes from, right? And iterate on all of these design concepts behind Stage Manager. Like, for example, the thing that creating a workspace has to be intentional, and by default, apps open as a single window in a separate workspace. That's a decision, and you can reverse that decision. Or get this, you can offer settings. Like in Safari. Safari literally has settings to say, I want to use the new design, I want to use the old design. Like, that's exactly what settings are for. Letting people decide what they want to do.
Yeah, and Safari even has things like open links in new windows versus new tabs. I mean, those are similar concepts when you think about it.
Yeah. So these conventions that Apple designers created, I think they are a misfire for this first version of Stage Manager. Maybe they need the public feedback at this point to understand why people don't like it. But these are things that can be fixed, right? I think, in the next 6 months, by iOS 16.2, 3.4, like all these updates, there is an opportunity to make this version, like to make Stage Manager a much, much better version.
Right.
There's a different conversation to be had about, well, like what we said before. You didn't really enable developers to do anything here. And I think I would be fine with waiting until iPadOS 17 for that. But some features, they can be changed in the meantime.
Well, and I think some of the fixes are things like there should be context menus for doing some of this, and
Right.
keyboard shortcuts integration. There are a lot of ways that you can give users control over how these windows behave.
Right. You mentioned context menus. One of the things that I find really surprising is in the strip, right? The strip, I think the way I put it in my story is it doesn't do what I thought it was supposed to do, and the thing it does, I find confusing. So, for example, the strip, like I thought, surely I will be able to right-click on one of those window thumbnails and have a menu with options.
Add to stage.
Add to stage, close window, show all windows. Like I thought, surely there's going to be a menu when you right-click it. There's no menu. Instead, the strip fills this double role as it's both a preview of recently used apps, sort of like imagine the app switcher, the main one, the big grid, right? So, kind of dripping off to the side of the iPad and forming the strip. That's kind of what it is. It's like a mini final appendix to the app switcher that shows you your recently used apps.
It's also a window manager on top of that. We could talk for an hour about all the weird things that are baked into this strip, I think.
Yes, it's also a window manager, and it's not a very fast or intuitive one at that. So yeah, there's that. Like I was expecting to have options. I don't have options. Instead, I have these multiple modes that are never explained to you. Like, for example, did you know that you can click on the tiny icons in the strip to filter the strip and become a window picker?
Yeah, nobody's going to find that. I mean,
nobody's going to find that. There's a ton of interactions like this in Stage Manager. And so there's that aspect of the strip. One of the other things that I think Apple should offer as a setting. Stage Manager trying to be helpful and placing windows around for you. I think there's a subset of users. Actually, no. I doubt that there's a subset of users who, on the one hand, use and like overlapping windows, and on the other, don't want to move them around exactly the way they want to.
Well, you can only have 4 of them anyway, so it's not that hard to drag them around yourself.
Let's assume that kind of person exists, right?
Yeah.
That a person who likes Windows, but only so much, not to wanting to move them around. Let's play that out. Keep the setting to have Stage Manager manage your windows, but also let me disable that. Like, have this become my responsibility. I'm asking you for it. Like, let me disable that. I will take care of managing my windows. And if I cannot find them anymore because I cannot see what's in the background, it's my fault. But at least I have the control over it. Same with the resizing. I don't know if it's technically possible. So the make a window, pixel by pixel as big or as small as you want. That's one of those.
That might not. Yeah, that's an underlying.
That might not be possible.
With size classes, that might not be possible.
Exactly.
Our thanks to Pillow for their support of AppStories. More and more studies show that getting a good night's sleep can help improve your health and well-being. Pillow is a simple app that helps you become more aware of your sleep patterns and make informed decisions that help improve your sleep quality. All you have to do is wear your Apple Watch while you sleep. Pillow takes care of the rest, tracking and analyzing your sleep automatically and giving you a full report in the morning. If you want to use Pillow with just an iPhone or an iPad, though, you can do that too with the press of a button. And if you have an Apple Watch, you can also get important information about your heart rate trend, variability, heart rate dip, and blood oxygen levels for each session. You can even record sounds like sleep talking, sleep apnea, snoring, or other noises that might be affecting your sleep. And if your Apple Watch is a Series 6 or newer, Pillow will also display information about the intensity of the sounds recorded during sleep and give you a rating of each. Another valuable aspect of Pillow is helping you make informed decisions to improve your sleep quality. Pillow comes with a dedicated section where you can discover trends, get personalized insights, sleep tips, and easily compare your sleep metrics with your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and other metrics. If you want to wind down and relax before going to bed, or listen to something all night long, Pillow comes with an expanding collection of sleep aid sounds, guided meditations, bedtime stories, and music produced specifically for sleep. You can use Pillow to track your naps too if you have the opportunity to do that during the day. And Pillow can wake you up at your lightest possible sleep stage using your iPhone, iPad, or Apple Watch. And starting with watchOS 6, Pillow's battery consumption is minimal too. Last but not least, Pillow is very privacy-minded. All of your sleep and audio data is encrypted and stored on your device and in your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. You don't need to register or create an account to use Pillow. You can use it completely anonymously, and it doesn't collect or send your data anywhere else. Pillow is free to download from the App Store and comes with a set of great free features that you can use every single day. And if you want to try its premium features, there's an option to start a 7-day free trial too. Just visit pillow.app to get started today. Again, that URL is pillow.app. Our thanks to Pillow for the support of the show.
And then I think we cannot avoid mentioning these, if even briefly, John, the bugs, just the problems.
Federico, before you get there, I just want to say for the record that I find trying to place windows in Stage Manager on the iPad like trying to move around icons on my home screen.
Well, it's iPhone. The springboard, right? It's when the same team, I think.
Right. It's because when it's in wiggle mode, and you know how you get to that point where you're like on your iPhone and you can't, the widgets are like going off onto their own screen, but you don't want that, and you can't get the icon into the right place. It's kind of like that, but with Windows.
There's those invisible rails that guide you, and they want to be followed, and you cannot escape them. So that's a very apt metaphor. Also because it's all springboard, right? It's all part of that process.
Right. All right. Well, tell me about a few of the bigger bugs that you're still seeing.
Where can I start? Well, I don't know. There's the phantom keyboard when using the share sheet. So a tiny random part of the software keyboard pops up if you're using a Magic Keyboard, and
it's like peeking up from the bottom of the window. It's just like the top row of the keyboard, basically.
Popping up from the bottom when you're sharing with the share sheet. You know the share sheet. When you're sharing a photo, a link, a document, a PDF, like whatever. It just the software keyboard is like, hey, I'm also here. It's like it peeks and says hi. There's the all the Magic Keyboard bugs, which is funny because like you're literally using Apple's how much is it? $350 accessory. And if in my experience, in my tests, if I want to use Stage Manager and don't run into all kinds of weirdness, things that you may think are not related at all with the bug you're seeing, the only way I can use it is by disabling the quick type predictions, the autocorrect, basically. If I don't, I'm seeing issues with you're opening a window in a third-party app and the keyboard doesn't type, or the keyboard shortcuts that you press don't register. In Messages, in Apple's Messages app, the compose field where you type an iMessage, it jumps and goes to, like, it floats to the top of the window.
Like half. I've seen that a lot.
Obsidian goes blank.
Oh,
The,
great.
yeah, and in this latest version on my Magic Keyboard with my keyboard layout, which is English, Italian, and emoji keyboards, yeah, Obsidian just goes blank, like literally a white window. Yeah, there's a ton of keyboard related bugs, which is funny again because you're using Apple's Premiere accessory for this. What else? I guess I need to take a look at my story to remember them all.
Yeah, there are quite a few still, but and I do wonder if this is related, as you suggested at the outset, to expanding the application of this feature beyond the M1 iPads, because people, I think people were rightly disappointed that their iPads that were only a couple of years old weren't going to get Stage Manager. But I do expect that also required Apple, when it decided to expand it to the Air, or I guess it was already on the Air, but they decided to expand it to additional iPads, that probably required some re-architecting of how it works.
Yeah. And look, to sum up, here's what I think happened and why I think Apple is gonna act surprised from all this feedback. I think the underlying problem is that at a fundamental design level and technological level, this was a macOS feature that was, and a decision was made internally at Apple to bring this macOS feature to iPadOS without requiring developers to do anything for it. That's the first fundamentally misguided problem here. That a macOS feature, for the sake of consistency, was forced upon iPadOS without the proper developer tools to optimize for it. Mm-hmm. Problem number one. Problem number two. Apple had an idea for how the kind of people who are going to use Stage Manager, who are going to want to use Stage Manager, will like to manage their workspaces. And I think Apple is under the wrong assumption here. Those people, myself included, we wanted flexibility and power. And instead, we got a system that is constantly holding our hand and forcing us to do things a certain way that are slow and limited and buggy. And problem number three, I think we, at the beginning of the summer, right after WWDC, we all thought, most of us thought, there are problems, but I can live with this. I'm sure that Apple will fix it. And they didn't. And so maybe we should have been more vocal about this earlier in the summer, but that's also kind of impossible to know in advance.
Right.
And I will add, there's another fundamental issue that Apple miscalculated. That they thought that making this exclusive to the M1 would justify the existence of the M1 and that it would make those M1 users happy. And I think this is just bad planning, bad product strategy. They should have known going into WWDC that Stage Manager was needed to work on all their hardware. So that's a failure from a product strategy perspective. So what happened is that Apple saw a bunch of initial criticism, right? Saw people complaining about external displays being buggy, saw people complaining about a lack of settings for workspaces. This is where I'm raising my hand. I was one of those people. I just thought, at the time I figured, if you give me a bunch of settings, I'm going to be fine with this. And then they saw the people really complaining about, like, why can I not run this on my 2020 iPad Pro?
Right.
And so Apple's engineering efforts and development time, it just went into the third bucket. It just went into, let's make sure we can backport this to the 2018 iPad Pro and the 2020 models. And so this is why we are now, think about it this way. Right now, it's like we are in June. And we have a first version of Stage Manager that works on all kinds of iPads, but with no refinements and iteration. So it's like we are in June, in October, basically.
Yeah. Now, it's fascinating to me because the problem on the iPad is in part that there's never been this kind of windowing system on this device. And so it's a lot harder problem to solve. And if it's done incorrectly or if it's buggy, there's really no good fallback. Whereas on the Mac, if it's buggy or doesn't work the way you want it to, people can just ignore it, which is both a good and a bad thing. It's good for me. If I don't like it, I can just use spaces or I can use any other method that I want to manage my windows. But by the same token, if this is meant to be kind of a bridge between the iPad and the Mac, if it's something that people don't like when they first use it on the Mac, they'll just ignore it too. So it's really problematic all across the board in that sense. All right, Federico. Well, that is Stage Manager on iPadOS 16.1, folks. So, check it out. I think everybody here who's listening to this show is probably curious about it, and I think it's worth trying and seeing for yourself what you think of it. But I'm sure we'll have more to talk about throughout the course of the next months and maybe even the course of the next year about this, Federico. I want to thank our 3 sponsors again. That's Revenue Cat, Collide, and Pillow. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is at Vitici on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.